All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear okay? Okay, great. Well, my name is Lisa Tate, and I am the Executive Director for the National Museum of Forest Service History, and I really want to thank you all so much for coming today. I want to welcome you to the Higgins Ridge Fire Story Project, and also to the growing campus of the National Museum of Forest Service History. We are a nonprofit organization, and we are dedicated to preserving and sharing the history of America's conservation legacy. The Higgins Ridge Fire Story is part of that legacy, and we are honored to bring this story to you today, and also through our oral history collections and our online collection. We will have this today's event, as well as the oral histories that were recorded over the last 2 days, available in the near future online through our online collection. And I would really like to thank the amazing team of people that we've had to pull this project together. We have had journalists, we have had videographers, we've had students, board members, historians, museum staff, and a wealth of volunteers that all worked together to bring us this project today. I would really like to thank all of the panelists that you see up here today, as well as the individuals that are unable to be with us, for bringing us their stories. I would also like to thank our sponsors. I'd like to thank Humanities Montana. I would like to thank the National Smokejumpers Association, and I would like to thank White's Boots for helping sponsor this event, but also the oral history collection, the transcription, and collecting of those oral histories. We have a representative here from White's Boots, and I would like to welcome Jacob Mannon up to the podium to just say a few words about White's Boots and the smoke jumpers that have used them.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to start out by thanking the museum helping us come here today on this beautiful campus. And when she reached out to us, we didn't hesitate to say yes. White's Boots has been supporting smoke jumpers now since the very beginning, and we count that as a calling. It's in our blood to support these guys, and we support everything they do. And we're so happy to be here. We're excited to listen to these guys' story, to preserve it, and I think that it's fitting to quote Teddy Roosevelt today. He said, I am only an average man, but by George, I work harder at it than the average man. And I think if you ask these guys, they're going to say they were doing their job. They were average men, but by George, on that day, they did more than most of us do in a lifetime. So for that, we're grateful. And from White's Boots, we want to say our deepest respects to you guys and your loved ones. God bless you.
Thank you very much. And I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's panel discussion, Bob McKean, President of the National Smokejumpers Association.
I'm hopeful that these papers don't get blown away. I hadn't thought about that when I went all papers here. You know, as an old smoke jumper myself, I'm always leery when stories from smoke jumpers start out with, and there I was. And every single one of them, no, that's not true. They were great. I listened to all but one of the oral presentations, and I have to say it was a privilege. And yes, indeed, more than once, in fact, many times, what we heard was, I was just doing my job. I was just doing my job. And in some of those cases, you know, I was sitting there listening to it on the other end, and I was thinking, yes, but, you know, you're a hero for what you just did. Or not just did, but what you did in 1961. So it was a privilege to hear all of the oral accounts. I want to thank the National Museum of Forest Service History for doing this. I want to and the Oral History Project and setting up the panel discussion. Most especially, I'd like to thank Lisa Tate for all the work that she did in putting this together. One of the things that I need to share with you is that one of the main people, of course, all of these people are very important, but unfortunately, Rod was unable to be with us today. He did give his oral history, and it was fabulous, but his wife became ill last night, so he had to go back to his home. That said, I and the interviewer certainly heard what he said, and we interviewed him for, I think, in excess of an hour, and we'll try to share his perspective as best we can. The purpose of this is to let these gentlemen tell their stories of the Higgins Ridge fire and to allow them to fill in the gaps. It was a pretty smoky, hot day up there, and each one of them has an account that differs a little bit from the other person. It's the fog of war syndrome. When you have that much going on with that much pressure, you get a piece of the vision of what happened, but it's really hard to develop the complete picture for one person to do that. The purpose of this also is to allow you and others to understand what happened that day in 1961, the events as they unfolded, what these men were doing and thinking, what actions both on the ground and in the air averted what was surely a potential catastrophe. It's also an opportunity for them to share how they view this experience now, almost 6 decades later. Finally, we would like to offer an opportunity toward the end for questions, a Q&A. We've allowed an hour and a half for this, and I'm going to try to stick to that because I know it's going to be warm out in the sun. So we'll try to do an hour for the gentlemen up here to share their stories, and I have a series of questions which I hope will stimulate the conversation. And then we'll open it up for questions. I would like to continue on by just introducing the panel, and if you would just raise your hand when I say your name, I would appreciate it. Wade Irwin, John Holtet, Tom Kavlicki, Don Gordon, Ross Parry, Roy Kirkalow, Jim Van Vleck, and Dale Graff. Also interviewed for this was Neil Wallstead. He was unable to make it today due to a wedding, and I happen to be old enough that Neil did his foremanship during most of my career as a smoke jumper, and I'll pass on just a couple of the statements that he made, and those of you that know him will be, I think, duly impressed by what his thoughts were. I have one question for the panel. One of the individuals, and this is not an advertisement for White's Boots, I want to make that clear. One of the panel members actually said they still had their White's Boots. Does anybody else still have their White's Boots? 2 of you? I have mine, you know, and they don't fit me anymore. Do they fit you guys? Yeah, you can drink beer out of them. Well, that's what he said. You know, and I've looked at mine periodically and thought, why would I continue to keep those? They don't fit anymore. And there must be a message in old smoke jumpers keeping their White's Boots. I don't know what it is. Anyway, I thought I'd ask that question. I thought I might get more of you, actually, but that's good, 2 of you. To set the stage for this, I would like to read a passage that Earl Cooley wrote about this. Back in, shortly after, in his book, The Ford Trails and Trimotors. And he talked about this particular incident, and I would like to just read that. And, oh, by the way, for those of you who don't know who Earl Cooley was, he was the first smoke jumper, and he was the head of the project here for years. So, and I believe he was the spotter on Man Gulch. I'm not completely certain about that. Anyway, and this is from Earl Cooley. As in every tough fire season, the jumpers had some close calls. The worst one happened on August 4th when 20 jumpers, led by Fred Wolfram, were working on the Higgins Ridge fire on the Nez Perce National Forest. The fire blew up and encircled the jumpers. Tree sap became steam and blew trees apart. The intense fire draft created a 60-mile-an-hour whirlwind at the core of the fire. It uprooted trees and flung rocks. It appeared that the only refuge available was the top of the ridge where the fire was started and where a small opening offered some hope of a helicopter rescue. One of the jumpers, Tom Kavlicki, later to become supervisor of the Perce. As Kovlicki made his way up the ridge, he saw the timber on a half-mile hillside go up in flames in 30 seconds. When they reached the burnt-over clearing, Wolfram told the crew to dig away ash and lie flat against the earth. The heat and flames were almost unbearable. That's all right, I'm done with that page anyway. The heat and the flames were almost unbearable. Let me see here, I lost my place. But the men held their ground. Kovlicki helped a jumper beat out his flaming clothing. He fully expected to be cooked by the heat or crushed by a falling tree. His senses numb from the heat and smoke, he thought he saw a tree falling toward him. He tried to roll out of the way, but he was too weak to move. Then he recognized the sound of a helicopter. Kovlicki was actually looking at the skids of a helicopter hovering a few feet over his head. Fortunately, the pilot pulled up for a better look at the landing spot, and Kovlicki was able to get out of the way. As soon as the copter touched down, 2 men with the worst injuries were loaded aboard and flown out. The pilot, Rod Snyder, promised to return for the rest of the crew if he could land. Fortunately, he was able to keep his promise, making the trip after trip through the flames until all the jumpers had been rescued. Some of the jumpers were flown to safety by laying in the skids on the helicopter. There were baskets in those old bells. For this exploit, Rod Snyder was awarded the North American Forest Fire Medal, which is reserved for heroism of the highest order. He knew that the 20-man crew was somewhere on the ridge and suspected they might be in serious trouble, so he went looking for them. He had about given up the search when he spotted them lying in the ash at the ridge top. If they had not been wearing special orange shirts treated to retard the fire, he might never have spotted them through the smoke and flames. This was the first year the jumpers had worn those shirts. So after listening to the various accounts, I have put this together in terms of the rest of the sort of overview of this, and then I'm going to ask these gentlemen to fill in all the details because they were there. 8 jumpers led by Ross. Ross, raise your hand. Were from Grangeville. Ross was the squad leader. They jumped the tri-motor Ford. 12 jumpers from Missoula, led by Fred Wolfram, jumped the DC-2. Perce met with Wolfram, who was in charge of the fire, and turned it over to him, in his words at the interview, as quickly as he could. Wolfram sent Perce and 4 others to the other side of the fire in an attempt to pinch the fire off from both sides. Is that accurate? That's about right, okay. And so I have a couple questions before I ask individually some questions. Who was initially with Perry's group from Grangeville? Who jumped the tri-motor Ford? Okay. And then the rest of you obviously jumped with Wolfram's group from Missoula. Who went with Perce on the far side of the fire and was there in the rock slide? No, you were with Wolfram. Yeah, so it was just the 2 of you, right? So there were jumpers actually hunkered up in 2 places, one on a rock slide on one side of the fire, and the other in the ash of an old burn, as I understand it, on the other side of the fire. So that's kind of the overview of the situation. And with that, the first thing I'd like to ask you gentlemen about, and this is, I'll ask a couple of you to start the conversation, and then my hope is that you'll pass the microphone around and kind of describe what you saw, what you felt when you first arrived on the fire, and then when it blew up. And I'm interested in you describing what it was like. What did it look like? What was the wind like, the flames, the spread? How did it feel? The heat, the smoke, the intensity. How did it sound? What went through your mind? What happened to make it blow up? So I would like to start that with Ross, because he was on the fire first.
Boy, I don't know what to say. As we arrived over the fire, it didn't look too bad. It was only about a quarter, half an acre. There were 8 of us. We assumed that we'd be able to handle it. As we started to attack the fire, We were able to make line rather quickly. Fairly close, fairly close to the fire. We were building line, trying to get as close to the fire as we could. We couldn't contain it. The embers kept dropping over the fire because it was so hot, and the fires just kept springing up all outside our line. I had to call our crew back about 3 different times to try and circle around the spot fires that had become so large that I couldn't handle them myself. And so it got intense. It was serious. I was scared. And then about that time, I realized that we were not going to be able to hold the fire. It was going to go. I figured, well, but we were smoke jumpers. We had to keep trying. It was our duty. We were going to keep building, doing whatever we could. Just about that time, I heard a plane overhead. This was about 3 hours after we had originally started fighting the fire. And I looked up and I saw a couple of parachutes out of the DC-3, I believe it was, that were coming to help us, and I was so relieved. I thought, hey, we're getting help. Maybe we can hold this fire. And lo and behold, Wolfram with his 12 jumpers came and joined us, and he was a foreman. I was a squad leader. I turned the fire over to him gladly, quickly, and said, "It's your fire." And it was his fire after that.
Dale, you had a good description of what the fire looked like. Would you pass the microphone to Dale? Dale, what did you see with regard to the fire? Talk about that.
Well, I remember jumping out of the Ford Tri-Motor. It's just like jumping out of a barn door. You just go out and straight down, as opposed to DC-3 where you really get the wind. But I remember jumping and landing in a pretty open area. Must have been the old burn, because I remember my last vision of that was our chutes all scattered out. Everybody got down okay, and all our personal gear was there. But we just grabbed our tools and got to work. And it didn't seem, like Ross said, it didn't seem too bad at first. And we started digging line. And I've heard that the temperature that day was 102. I'm not sure, but pretty soon the wind kicked up. Somebody ought to jump out of that thing. Anyway, the wind kicked up, and I've never seen this in 39 jumps. Everywhere a spark lit or a burning pine cone started a fire. And then pretty soon we just tried to put them all out, like Ross says. And pretty soon it was all around us. And it's just like a hopeless case. And we figured we were really in trouble. And there was a bunch of big boulders. They were huge boulders. And I remember climbing up in those boulders with Ross and a couple of other guys. And we figured they weren't going to burn, thank goodness. And I dug down underneath the boulder, tried to get the fresh air, and put a wet bandana over my face to try and get some air, breathing. And it was so hot in there, the cap on my canteen actually melted. And I think Ross was saying too, his canteen started on fire and the canteen fell out, and the cuffs of my pants started burning. And we ended up trying to keep each other from burning. And I looked up, and it's just like a tornado, a convection of fire, just a whirling like that. It was right above us, just going up. And the trees exploded, I've never seen that either before. The trees just exploded, and boy, we were worried about branches of burning stuff coming down on us. And after a while, I don't remember how long it was, seemed like forever, but I hear this helicopter coming. And he couldn't land because of the wind was kicking him around, and Rod come in and got as low as he could, and two of us jumped, or two people jumped inside, two jumpers jumped inside, and myself and another guy hung on the strut on the outside, and he took us over to the hill spot, I guess, is where we went. But it was hairy, pretty hairy, all right.
Would you pass a microphone that way? And Wade, I believe it was you who were talking about how hard it was to see. Is that correct? Very hard. Why don't you pass the microphone over and let him talk about that?
After the fire went over us, and we were in the middle of it there. Then we got the secondary part of the fire, and that was the smoke, and it was white smoke. And I even made a mention that it was being just like you were inside a ping pong ball. You couldn't tell where anything was. It was just all white around you. Could barely see the other guys next to you. And
Right up to your mouth.
oh, like that? You want it there? Okay. And so, see, like I want to eat this thing. And so, anyway, when that smoke got to us, that's what I personally thought was going to get us. We were still there. We were going to be up in there for a long time, it looked like. And people's eyes were swelling shut. They were coughing. You couldn't move around. We did not know where to go. We were completely, we just had no idea where we were at or where to go. We thought about once trying to just walk off of that thing and get down on the other side of the ridge or someplace, but we didn't know where to go. We just couldn't do it because we didn't have any idea where it was going to end up at. So it was just one of those tough things that I brought up about the ping pong ball, because that's just exactly what it looked like inside that fire.
Pass it to Tom, and Tom, I would like, you have to put the microphone up close.
Okay, I got it.
Tom, your account of what you were asked to do by Fritz and what you saw, would you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We decided, or Fritz decided, to make an anchor point out of the line that had been previously built by earlier Smokejumper crew. And then that crew was relieved from that fire. And then, as you are gathering, the rest of us jumped again in the same location. And before we started digging line, though, Fritz said something very unusual. He said, I want all the parachutes, all the gear, the helmets, the climbing spurs, and all your personal gear on top of the ridge above the jump spot. And we did that. We carried all our gear, all the jump gear, all the personal gear, and put it in a pile. And that pile, at a later time in this episode, disappeared. 20 sets of everything was gone, chutes and personal gear. But as we went back down into the hole, so to speak, to start digging, connecting line, we couldn't have been working more than maybe an hour. And Fritz got a hold of me. I was on the tail end of a step-up crew bumping, digging and chopping with Pulaski's. He said, I want you to go back to the very anchor point and watch to see what's happening with that fire back there. And this was the fire that was downslope from us, and it wasn't doing anything except just perking along. And I went back and I stood there for probably maybe 3-4 minutes, and I saw something that I've never seen since. The whole hillside below me, in front of me, and uphill from me burst into a ball of fire. And the heat was searing and it was roaring, and I got a little bit concerned about my safety. Tucked my hat down and I put a wet kerchief over my nose, and I ran through that ball of fire to get back to where my crew was. And I got there okay without any severe hurt. and told Fritz what I saw, and he said, "That's it." He said, "Put your tools down," and he says, "Grab whatever 5-gallon buckets of water we got left and follow me." On the previous flight around looking for a jump spot, he spotted an old rock pile that we found out later was a helispot, but abandoned over the years. It was growing in with brush but no trees. And he took us from that situation up this ridge hillside and into this rock pile. And what was unique is that we didn't have a radio with us. And what we found out later on was that a cold front was coming in from the Pacific Northwest. And for those of you that are not familiar, a cold front makes a fire burn counterclockwise rather than clockwise. And that's what trapped us. The minute that wind hit us, and it was probably perking around 50 to 60 miles an hour, everything around us became illuminated with, as these other folks experienced, huge pine cones and alpine trees exploding, and just pure chaos with noise and sound. And we were struggling to get up the hill. We finally made it, okay, and then all hell broke loose. That's when the rest of the fire kicked into gear.
Okay, would you pass the microphone or to Roy? Roy, talk about what it looked like from your perspective, and what you were doing in terms of seeing the fire as it exploded.
Well, the first thing that I remember is being at the off the top of the ridge, and I was carrying a 5-gallon water can. So the very first thing that I remember is hearing the order to drop everything and get to the top of the ridge. So I didn't know what was going on, since all I was doing was digging line at the time. So I kept the water can, went and scrambled to the top of the ridge to the heli spot that has been referred to. And what I remember then is what you've been listening to, the wind, 50, 60 miles an hour, trees exploding, and the going from one side of that small heli spot to the other, trying to find trying to find air to breathe, since the wind kept shifting from one side to the other. And we were lying down, looking for, scraping the ashes away, looking for bare dirt. And with the 5-gallon water can, it provided us with the means to wet handkerchiefs or shirts or whatever to breathe through. And that acted, of course, as a filter and kept a lot of the ash out of our lungs. And after that, the next thing I remember is the helicopter approaching, because of the noise. The helicopter could hear that. And then finally, the pilot obviously seeing us because of our orange shirts, and then landing and then taking us out as 2 at first, I believe, but then with 4 jumpers, 2 inside and 2 outside of the aircraft.
Thank you. And, I listened to Neil Wallstead, who is not one who says a lot of words for people that know him. And he's quite a guy. He was, somebody that I held in deep respect as a smoke jumper, and anybody that jumped with him knows that they did the same. And what caught my attention in his interview, one of the most important things, was there was a point in time in there when he was asked the right question, and he said straight up, "I thought I was going to die." Just straight up. And it was smoke inhalation. He couldn't breathe. So that sets the scene of the fire. That's the first part of this. And the next part, I'd like to talk a little bit, or have these guys talk a little bit, about actions on the ground by the jumpers. And I would like to start with Roy. And Roy, I want to I want to start with Ross. And Ross, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you did, and also I want you to talk about, was Man Gulch in your mind? Because that was only a decade earlier.
After the fire blew up, and I knew that we were in trouble, we started headed back to what I hoped would be an opening at the point of the ridge, because we were on to the east side of the ridge, whereas the main crew was on the other side. So as we headed back towards the point of the ridge, I was amazed at how the fire had circled around us, below us. I just couldn't imagine how it had gotten there so fast. It wasn't a roar and a go, it was a bump, bump, bump. It just popped up here and around, but it was around us. And so as we headed back, it looked like we might have a slight opening on the point of the ridge to where we could maybe run down safely out of the fire. Otherwise, we knew the fire was going to get us. But what kept in my mind was the Man Gulch fire. 13 jumpers had tried to outrun the Man Gulch fire, and only 2 of them had made it out safely. That was on my mind. Whereas Dag Dodge, the leader of that Man Gulch fire, had built a backfire where he had cleared out the area, and he laid down in that backfire. The fire went over him. Consequently, he survived along with the 2 jumpers that had outrun it. The rest perished. That was on my mind. That was strictly on my mind. I decided I wanted to hold up. So I told the guys that were with me, we came to this rock pile. I told the guys, dig yourself a hole in these rocks and we'll let the fire go over us. They did. One of them came up to me and he says, I don't want to die. Now, none of us wanted to die. We were scared. We were all scared. But I told him, I think he'll be all right here. And so we dug us kind of a shelter area in these rocks and let the fire swoop up over us from one side and then the other. And we survived. It turned out to be the right choice. I don't know whether if we had tried to outrun that fire to the point of the ridge, would that have been a right choice too? I don't know. But the choice we made was right. We survived. Thank you.
Pass it over to Tom. And Tom, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the decisions and actions of Fritz, since he can't be here with us.
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to point out the fact that Fritz's daughter, Julie Wolfram, is here representing Fritz's memory. So, Julie, where are you? Raise your hand. Yeah. Your dad was the hero indeed, I'll tell you that. As Ross described his actions, we had a similar episode in that Fritz told us to lay down, dig a hole, and get something like a T-shirt, soak it in that bucket and put it over our head and keep your head in that hole, and then look up occasionally to see who was on fire next to you. Levi's were catching on fire, gloves were kind of melting, anything that was made out of metal became impossible to touch, and your job was to pat that fire out as quickly as you could on another man's pair of Levi's. Believe it or not, in those days we wore cotton Levi's fighting fire along with the brand new fire shirt. And I guess if I had to look at technology today, I'd say those fire shirts played a big important role in keeping our bodies somewhat free from burn injuries and kept us cool because they were thick and heavy, and when that, I think, thwarted off a lot of fire. As the fire progressed, it became more chaotic. As he mentioned, you couldn't hear anybody talking. Fritz was having a tough time controlling some of the comments that were being made about getting up and running. And one one of us got up and started walking rather zombie-like away from the crew, and Perce yelled, "Get him," and bring him back. So a couple of guys went and got him and brought him back and got him calmed down, laid in a hole, and started, doing the survival thing. And Neil Wallstead was laying next to me on one side, and Fritz was on the other side. And maybe about the time we thought that we were going to have a tough time in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I poked Neil and I said, "You remember how that Hail Mary thing goes?" And and he started laughing, and I knew that we turned a little bit of a corner there, and in keeping our spirits up about, we're going to get out of this particular mess.
Wade, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the evacuation, the helicopter evacuation, what you saw. Was it chaotic, or what happened on the evacuation?
What I saw wasn't really chaotic. It was, and the reason it wasn't is right because what Ross has been brought up, we were taught how to do what our squad leaders and our foremen told us to do. And that helps us a lot. I mean, they did the job of telling us what to do, and we did what they said to do, and they did it, and it worked. So there's no doubt about that. It was not hectic. I saw the helicopter coming in. I was just right on that point of that where he was coming into that little clearing where there were some logs laying down, and he was doing this. He was wobbling quite a bit when he got up over there, and there was fire around the helicopter. And he just that's when he would wave us on and say, come on, let's get two in here and two on the struts. And so we did it that way, and it all comes down to doing what those foremen and those squad leaders told us to do, and it went perfect. It really wasn't any chaos to it at all. And I personally was standing at the edge of the clear cut there that we were in, and I had not got my handkerchief, I hadn't torn my T-shirt off yet. And that's what a lot of the guys were doing, and putting water on their T-shirt and then putting it around their face. And I had not done that yet, but there was one guy that came up beside me in the smoke and said, "Wade, here's a handkerchief. It's all full of water. Get it around your face." And so I did. I don't know who that was. And then he said, "Let's lay down on the ground right here." And so we both did, and we made it right through that whole thing. But I don't know who he was that gave it to me. I thought he was from Grangeville, but I don't know. Maybe he'll remember if he's around, because he really helped me out right there.
I'd like to ask if anyone else here would like to talk about actions on the ground, the leadership, and that kind of thing. Anybody else have any comments about that?
Fritz was an outstanding leader. One of the things that struck me, when he flew out of Missoula, he didn't take his flame-proof shirt. He'd sit there, hunkered down in a T-shirt. And that's my recall of Fritz. The other thing, my recall of the helicopter, when it landed, I did hear it. And I looked around, and I saw this other guy standing up with a radio. Where the heck did he come from? I guess it was an FCO officer who Fritz brought in and had the radio and whatnot. I also recall Fritz going like this, 2 or 4 for the helicopter. 2 in the bubble, I call it the bubble, and 4 in the struts and the bubble. Anybody else?
Rod, when he waved me and one other person to get in the cockpit with him in the helicopter, and we were the only 2 in there. In fact, I was sitting right beside him, and he looked over and he says, "My manifold pressure is not too good. I'm going to dive this helicopter off the ridge and then bring it back up to take you back up to safety. So don't get scared." Well, we were already scared. Didn't have to worry about that. So anyway, he did a really good job.
Any other comments about actions on the ground?
Yeah, I want to bring this into focus for everybody. When the helicopter first landed, with Rod Snyder in control of the blades, and he sat down and the bubble door opened up. This is the helicopter that you see in the movie MASH, little helicopters with baskets for the wounded. and the door opened up, and out stepped a forest ranger, completely decked out with his uniform, and he was the district ranger from Moose Creek, and this is where the Hollywood part comes in. He said, "I've got a path out of here, follow me." And we looked up in a horror as the whole world in front of us was falling apart and burning and blowing up and skidding downhill, and we could hardly hear each other. And Fritz Wolfram looked at him and he says, "We're staying right where the hell we are now. Get out of the way."
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit here about the actions of Rod Snyder. And did you have a comment? I don't want to miss you.
Oh, well, I could back up to the beginning when we were lined up after we'd had a bite to eat, just what Fritz told us to do, because we knew it was going to be a long night. I was about halfway back down the fire line when Fritz told us we're going to have to turn and go back straight through the trees into what was thinner timber, where we've been all focusing our attention on where there had been an old hella spot. And I can remember we were in that situation has been described, but looking after each other, it seemed to be kind of a bond of camaraderie where we were looking at, because sometimes sparks would get on your cotton jeans or shirts, not on the shirt, it wouldn't burn, but we'd have to not put the fire out on each other sometimes, just little blazes that popped up. But then I started to hear, and I got over near Fritz, and he was saying, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday," over the radio. And then Rod answered. I overheard that kind of come back, and all of a sudden Rod pulled the helicopter right down to where we were. And I remember him giving a signal for 2 to try it with the weight of two jumpers the first trip. And then when he came back, then he said 4. And that seemed to be, but I was quite fortunate in that I had glasses. Always kind of cursed them, but in this particular case, I could always see things. And there were a couple other guys with glasses so when we were hunkered down, and before the helicopter appeared, we could see a tree that would blow off on fire, and obviously it was going to blow down on us, and so we could kind of help nudge the crew out of the dangerous way. And then the helicopter came and the whole picture changed as far as hope, because when you're in facing the flames, that actually backing up to even the beginning of that fire season, it was so dry in the bush that even the ground seemed to burn. It was quite hard to do mop up during that fire season. The fire was the whole situation was so explosive. So as it went, then we all got out and to the meadow where he dropped us off, and there was a crew coming up from the ground that we got together with, and the fire camp was set up, and we started to demand through Moose Creek.
Any other comments on the actions of the jumpers on the fire? Leadership?
I just want to mention that I was absolutely amazed at the bravery of Rod Snyder bringing his copter down through what I thought was an impossible situation. It looked like he brought it right down into the middle of the fire with smoke. I don't imagine how he could see. I was just amazed at it.
You talk about leadership and sharing yourself with the situation and people kind around you. I found out 14 years after this incident from Rod himself that he was told by dispatch to quit looking for us and immediately go back to Boise with the helicopter because his wife was delivering their child. And he refused to do that. He put the jumpers on the same basis as his wife and soon-to-be child. That's the kind of teamwork camaraderie we had from the overhead team, Fritz Wolfram and Rod Snyder.
And one thing it's a shame that Rod couldn't be with us today. His interview was very interesting. It started off fairly slow because he's a very humble man and doesn't view himself as a hero. Imagine that. But as time went on, he opened up, and he was very proud of what he had done. And by the way, just in case you didn't know that, he was a smoke jumper too. He jumped for 3 years, before he became a pilot. And I know that when I first read that, because I read that before he came, I thought, my God, no wonder he wouldn't leave those guys there. They were his guys. And I think that some of you felt that way too. But in the interview, we asked him that directly, and he says, no, I was going in there. So it may have been in the back of his mind, but I think it had more to do with who he was as a person. I really do. I'll just say a few words about the interview that we had with Rod. I know I won't do it justice, but I'll do my best. He was down at Moose Creek when the fire blew up, and I can't remember the name of the ranger, Magnuson maybe? Magnumson. Got in the car. They were going to go up and take a look at the fire, and they got up there, and Rod started looking for the smoke jumpers down there. And he said that he didn't even consult with the ranger whether he should go in and try to get him, and the guy was sitting right next to him. So he went in there and he finally saw the orange shirts after passing back and forth, and went in there, and of course it was squirrely winds and high winds and squirrely winds, all of that stuff, and it took him several passes to make the first landing, and he started off with 2. And I don't know if he made more than one trip with 2, but right shortly thereafter, he started taking 4. And anyone that knows anything about those little Bell helicopters, that's way overloading that helicopter, way overloading it. And I'd like to stop for a moment. We have really a helicopter expert here. And James Van Velk, you spent your career both flying helicopters and training helicopter pilots. Would you talk a little bit about what you, in retrospect now, some years later, 60 almost, what did you think about where he landed and how he did that?
Do you have to press? No, I guess not. Well, first of all, I think the synopsis of what happened on the ground was pretty accurate. I can only remember that we were digging fire lines, and Fritz grabbed us and told us to get up to the top of the hill. And so we went up there, and pretty much were just standing around waiting for something to happen, and all of a sudden a helicopter came overhead, and lo and behold, he landed, and I was one of the chickens. I was the first one out, and I don't know who else was with me, but he took 2 that first trip and took us someplace, some meadow, and went back and came back with 4 people. Now, I have flown the military version of the Bell, I think 47G, and what he did can't be done. That helicopter was so overloaded, it shouldn't have been able to get off the ground, but somehow he managed to do it. He apparently had to land downwind. As I recall, we were on the top of a ridge, and the fire was coming up the ridge towards us, and he landed just a few feet from me, and Fritz said, "Get on." So we just happened to be standing closest to the helicopter, so myself and whoever else, I don't remember, were the first 2 out. So he was able to somehow hover in downwind, and you shouldn't do that. But when he took off, he was able to take off down the hill and get airspeed and make it work. I don't know how he did it. I really don't. I don't have an awful lot of time in the H-13, just a couple hundred hours. but I would have been hesitant to go in there with a Huey, which has a lot of power. So that's about it. I just think it was, he did something that can't be done.
I'm going to transition to the last section before Q&A, and this section is about lessons and reflections. And what I'd like you folks to think about is what lessons were there in that fire? What lessons about leadership? What lessons about teamwork? What lessons did you learn now that you've had a lot of years to think about it?
I'll be the first. Just do as you're told, follow your training, and you should come out okay.
I had never thought of myself as a leader, and I was kind of shy, but I felt like the crews, the smokejumpers, the crews that we were trained, that they were trained and respected their leadership. Consequently, I just felt that they were willing to do what they were told. And I just cannot understand why I felt so humble at leading this bunch of guys, because they were tremendous.
Well, it takes a little reflecting, but you realize, how following directions and keeping your, I was quite fortunate because I had glasses, so I could see all the time. And so you can get a position or a situation where you can see danger before others might see it, and you can, the camaraderie is all part of it that knits us together to be able to get each other out of a tree that's blowing up and burning. It might be blowing onto us, so we could get out of its way while we were hunkered down before the helicopter fade. So leading up to it, the tone was set, as I understand, among all of us. It was survival is because we stick together.
Yeah, I can't add much more because I'm following in their foot tracks with comments, but I'll tell you what, it's teamwork. We were taught to act as a team, behave as a team, and support each other as a team. This was not a time to be an individual as much as it was to be part of that overall team effort and follow the directions that our squad leaders and our foremen on the fire demanded from us, and we gave it back to them in terms of our survival. It's a wonderful feeling when you can exert that as a group of people rather than as an individual. It was a powerful experience in terms of teamwork and who our leaders were, and the training we received was fantastic. All that pre-training before you actually went out of an airplane to fight a fire really kicks in.
Confidence. I had confidence in what I could do, and I had confidence in all my fellow smoke jumpers. I think the underlying thing is confidence in what you can do.
I just want to bring it up that what we're talking about here right now was when I was telling you that one of the guys came up to me. I didn't have anything around my face. I didn't have any water on me. And there we were. And so he gave that to me and then helped me. He said, let's lay down. I'll never forget that. He said, let's get down here and stay down. And that probably might have saved me a little bit. I know that much.
I always like to compare it to a band of brothers that you, in the military, where you know the fellow next to you and your life may depend on your partner. I was on one fire where his first fire jump, he came down and oscillated against a big boulder and broke his back. He was paralyzed from here down. So a lot of times your life may depend on someone else getting you out. And like they say, the training and the competence of the people you work with is really important.
Okay, I have another question for you. How did this fire or your experience as a smoke jumper affect the rest of your life?
Myself personally, I don't think it had a big effect. It just gave me something to lie and brag about. And it's like war is hell and so are fires.
Well, I spent a career in the military afterwards, and there was many difficult situations, difficult times that I was in the military, and I thought back often of the times as a smoke jumper, that things were tough then, and they kept me going tough because of the smoke jumper experience. It kept me going tough in the military. So that's how I think smoke jumper affected me. I thought of it many, many times, that what I was doing at the present time, it was comparatively easy as compared to what I had done as a smoke jumper.
I believe smoke jumping was the highlight of my working career. I don't know, it was something I was always proud of having done, and something I was really feel fortunate that I had the experiences I did. I believe that it helped give me confidence in moving forward in the other things I did.
I think attitude had quite a thing that was ingrained in us, is doing some of Leonard Kraut's good deal projects that he often had a list of every morning. We woke up after breakfast, had to report to the head shed for work details. But there was kind of a commonality among the rest of the guys working together, whether you didn't know him because you never had met him, and you hadn't trained with him, but it didn't make any difference. The new jumpers were just the same as the oldest jumpers, you know, and most of the things we did, whether you were out on projects or on a fire together, or especially an ideal two-manner where that was really kind of accelerated, then we had that stuck with you right through life, I think, as far as relationships.
Yeah, I guess when I reflect about that question and how to answer would be the fact that when I take a look at what happened to us, I was watching a movie that was showing what leadership and teamwork was all about. And I went on to become a line officer inside the Forest Service for the next 30 years. And there were many a time when the events that happened on this fire came into focus for me, when I had to make a decision that was either dicey or political or cultural or otherwise, that I wouldn't have had that experience without being a smoke jumper, to tell you the truth. It prepared me for a hell of a career.
I found being a former smoke jumper opened a lot of doors myself. Frequently, meeting with people or a job interview would say, "What have you done in the past?" I would mention it. Suddenly, that door came wide open. So I look at this: is the door open? If the person asked the question, I'd respond, and there's instant interest in what I had been doing.
Well, I went on in my career, put 30 years in fire control. I used this fire as an example when I was a fire control officer on 2 different ranger districts. And I used it to show an example of how you get away and what you do with all your stuff for the squad leaders and all the foremen, and how you're going to do what they say if you get into this situation. And I went on to train a lot of crews. I went on to be the coordinator at Region 8, and I had to train a lot of crews in firefighting, suppression, and so I used this. I used it. It got me, I was able to.
Can we give these gentlemen a round of applause? You know, I would just say before I open this for questions that it took all of them, in a sense, to survive this. All of them. You know, and Rod was amazing. There's no question about it. But so were these guys here. So was Fritz. So was Ross. All of them. With that, I'll open it for questions. If we don't have a microphone in the crowd, can you take it out there and then, yeah. Any questions? Yeah, they want you to identify yourself one more time so that they can tell if they remember you.
Maybe ask Tom to bring the microphone down here. Hey, Tom, can you bring the microphone to the stage so that they can identify themselves, please? Thanks.
And with regard to the next question, if you want to yell it out, I'll just repeat it. That might be the easiest way to do this. They want you to identify yourself and be real loud right into the mic.
I'm Wade Irwin, and I was a fire control officer, like I said, on 2 different ranger districts, so I had a lot of experience and I used it.
John Holtat.
Tom Kovalicki, Forest Supervisor, Perce National Forest, Idaho.
I've been retired since 01 and enjoying it very much.
Don Gordon.
I'm Ross Perry. I retired as a Forest Service computer specialist.
I'm Roy Corcolo. I jumped for 6 years while going through college, and then, as I mentioned before, it's been a career in the military after that. Flying, jumping, and as an airborne ranger pilot.
Jim Van Vleck, I was only a smoke jumper in 1961, and after that the Army got me, and I spent 27 years in the infantry, most of it flying helicopters.
Dale Graff, I think the smoke jumping job got me a career as a state game warden. And I was a game warden. I graduated in wildlife tech from Missoula. And after my 3 summers smoke jumping, I got hired as a state game warden and spent 31 years all over Montana as a state game warden, sergeant, captain, and my last job was assistant chief of the game wardens in Helena. And I loved every minute of both jobs.
Question. The question is who jumped with Ross again? And go ahead. Oh, you mean all the guys that jumped with him? There were 4 of you that jumped with Ross. Raise your hands, please. There's 6? Okay. All right. Well, there were 8 total, but these are the guys that are present that did, okay? Yes, exactly. Any other questions? I want you to stand up and kind of shout it out. Please, please. There were, I heard the question, as I understand it, he was saying there were 2 opinions about did they have a radio or didn't they have a radio. And he said also with the radio they should have gotten a red flag warning. I don't know if they did that in those days or not. There was a radio. Okay. Yeah, please answer into the mic so the people can hear.
Fritz Wolfram had the radio? Huh, okay.
My crew in the rock pile were the last to get on the helicopter. We had to come up through the smoke and flames and work our way up to the copter pilot. When I got up there with my crew, the 4 guys with me were loaded on the copter, and Rod took them back. He came back, and I and the forest ranger with his radio were then carried out.
Again, it's a fog of war kind of thing. Yes?
I'd like to put my Uncle Don on the spot. Earlier today, he told me something about the condition of that helicopter when it was all over, and I wonder if he would share that with everybody. Don.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't doing my job there. I heard your question. The question was about, he'd heard stories about the condition of the helicopter, and Don had shared those conditions. And before he answers, I'll answer that question for you, because that came out in the interview with Rod. And he said it was in the paper that the helicopter was damaged and had problems, but they brought a mechanic in from Johnson that night to Moose Creek, and that helicopter was flying again within 48 hours, and there wasn't anything wrong with it. Questions? Any other? Yes, sir.
How much overtime did you get?
How much overtime did you get? Remember that 50 some odd years later, right?
Very little.
In 1961, in that summer, 2.5 months, I made $2,500. That was a lot of money for a college kid in 1961. Ended up going to Mexico and getting married.
I want to add to the overtime effect. We were told to put all our personal gear. Every jumper carries a little bag below his tummy when he jumps, and in there he's got his spare eyeglasses, camera, goodies to eat, cigarettes, whatever. And of course, that all got burned up. And I had just come home from the Army, and I had a brand new Ryko single-lens reflex camera worth big bucks then. And of course, that got burned up, and they said, "Don't worry, we cover everything. When our people lose their gear out of fire, we take care of you." And so I finally got a check for $100, and they said, "There's a limit on how much we take care of you."
Any other questions? Yes.
I understand that the ranger on there was Jack Puckett. I understand, is that correct?
He's asking, was the ranger involved Jack Puckett in any way? And the answer's...
Jack was the ranger of that district, was he? Jack was at Powell.
He was apparently Jack was at Powell at that time. Trying to repeat. Any other questions?
The gentleman asked about pay. Our pay was straight time, no overtime. As I recall, hourly wage was either $1.72 or $1.92 an hour. And one of the ways we would make money is when the fire season, 5 o'clock, the fire was over. Then you walk out, and you'd walk as far as you could. You sleep on the trail, then walk some more, but you got paid straight time for that. But there's no overtime. Am I correct about the $1.72 or $1.92? In that range.
Any other? Think about how much time that means when you're at that rate to make, what did you say, $2,500 for the summer? Yeah, that's a lot of hours. Any other questions? Yes.
What was the fitness program for preparing these men? They all talk about training. And they hiked mountains and rocks. And what did you do to prepare these gentlemen as teams for fitness?
They asked about the fitness program. What was the fitness program that prepared you to do these things?
Fitness? You mean the training? I'll tell you, when you first signed up as a smoke jumper, your first year, they really put you through it. I had one leader that used to lead us in the calisthenics, the exercise, and he used to just work our butts off. And one time, and he would run a mile after we got through our calisthenics, and he ran so doggone fast that I hated that guy. He later became one of my best friends. I'll tell you the fitness situation on the first year of your training. They had a very rigorous training situation going. One of the things was a obstacle course type run, and you had to go through this obstacle course doing some jumps and rolls and get up and go again and jump and roll, and then a race around this obstacle course, getting through it. And you had to do that within a certain time limit. Otherwise, they would wash you out. And I wasn't the fastest runner. I wasn't the slowest. But I knew that I could run this obstacle course in the time requirement without, busting my butt too bad. I just had to keep going. We had a foreman at that time in the Smokejumpers that was watching this obstacle course go. After I ran through my course, not the fastest time in the world, but well within the time limits, he called me over and he says, "Ross," he says, "you were dogging it." He was right. I wasn't busting my butt. I knew I could make it within the time. And he says, "I'm washing you out. You're done. You're through with it. Smoke jumper." I didn't say anything. Apparently he didn't follow through because I made it.
Now I got a question there. Go ahead and stand up and. I can't hear you. Sorry, the train there.
Training in 64 was all I heard because of my brother Don in 61 was when a guy here was sitting down for me and said, "You did 10 pull-ups, your brother would have done 20. Is that right, Neil?
What he said was that he trained in 64, and when he did 10 pull-ups, the instructor said, "You did 10, but your brother did 20, or something like that. Any other questions for this group? Do we have family members out there? Would the family members stand up, please? Please stand up, family members. All right. I just want to point out that many of you are the living legacy of the decisions that these guys made on the fire that day. Are there any other jumpers from 61 here? Oh, there's one in the back. All right, well, I'm going to turn this back over to Lisa. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, gentlemen, for allowing me to be a part of this.
Well, I would like to also thank everyone that participated in this project. And I wanted to just mention a little bit about this project and how it came to be. And the importance of preserving these types of stories. It's a big part of what our museum, the mission of our museum, it's to preserve the history and legacy of America's conservation legacy. The Forest Service is a cornerstone of that legacy. And when we were first looking at projects for this coming year, for 2019, I remembered a little tiny thing in the back of my mind about Higgins Ridge. And I didn't really know much about it. I had heard about it because I knew Rod Snyder, and I've known Rod Snyder for about 35 years, and I'd known him for about 20 years before someone mentioned to me at a barbecue for pilots that he was a smoke jumper and he had been wanting to meet Rod Snyder his whole life and didn't know that Rod had been there. And I asked him why he wanted to meet Rod, and he said because he had heard about this Higgins Ridge story. So when I started doing a little research to see, well, would this Higgins Ridge story be something that we should do with the museum, I was really quite shocked at how little information I was able to find. I was able to find a couple articles that had been written, one by Ross Perry, one by Tom Kovalicki, in some old Smokejumper magazines. We found some old newspaper articles of when Rod had been nominated for the Carnegie Medal for Bravery. But really, there was very little written about this story. And when we started doing a little digging and we thought about the magnitude of this story and how many individuals from Higgins Ridge have passed away due to age, we thought this is really a travesty if we don't collect these oral histories and tell this story. So there was a great team of people and great sponsors that made this happen. Again, I know I said in the beginning I really wanted to thank everyone, but it was a huge team effort. And when I first started, thinking about this project, I thought we would be lucky to get maybe 5 or 6 panelists for today, and to be able to have all of these gentlemen here. They came from all over the United States and Canada. Their families came from all over the place to witness this and be a part of this with them. So I just really want to give them a round of applause and a standing ovation, please, for all that they've done. And as I also mentioned previously, all of this is being recorded for the museum's collection. We also will be transcribing all of the oral history interviews that took place over the last 2 days, and those videotapes and transcriptions will also be available in the future through the museum's collection. So thank you again for coming, and I hope that you will continue to watch the progress of the museum and to continue to support our presentations like the one we had today.